Welcome to those of you watching on YouTube. This is Blowing Smoke with Twisted Rico. I'm your host, Steve Riccardo. If you want to hear this entire show with intros, outros, and music, I'll be playing some new music on this episode. Please go to Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music. There's so many of them. Please welcome to the show, the Reverend Hank Peirce.
Woo!
And I finally said his name right. It took me 4 tries. You're on the show for the fourth time, and I think that puts you like in a tie with Duncan Wilder Johnson, if I'm not mistaken. Not counting um other, co-hosts and things like that. I don't know if you feel special at all by me
I
telling
feel
you.
very special, and I somehow I want to do something to beat Duncan now. Like we,
You and Duncan are like the most least confrontational people I know. I can't imagine you trying to beat each other at something.
I mean, but like like we'll think about like thesaurus words. We'll think of it'll be a really sort of very no real winners, no real losers. No, I'll
Try to
crush you.
talk to him about Worcester bands. He's got you beat there because he
Oh,
knows
that's true.
every band from Worcester, except for the real old ones like I do. So how was your whole, like, I don't know what you do, because you're a minister and stuff. I mean, are your holidays any different than anyone else? I mean, how were they this year?
They were great. I'm not serving at church these days. So I'm sort of freelancing it around and bouncing around. But a friend was uh, 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 had COVID, and so and she was just getting over it, and so she this year, Christmas Eve was on a um uh Christmas Eve was on a Sunday. So she
Yeah,
was
I
like,
think so.
"You do
Yeah.
Sunday morning, I'll do Sunday night." I was like, "Great!" So I preached on Christmas Eve morning, which as you can imagine, not a big attendance because everyone's like church twice a day, So, but that was fine. That was lovely, and it was great to have a chance to do that. But
Is your
usually Christmases are super hectic. Um, but this was lovely. My oldest daughter was back from school in Canada. She's up at Concordia in Montreal, and
Nice?
I I've been telling everyone this story. She like, she came back from school and went and off visited friends, and then she came to my wife and I the next morning, and she went, "So what are the drinking rules around here?" Because the drinking age is 18 in Quebec, and I said, "The drinking rules haven't really changed. Haven't changed here. Haven't changed here." So, and then we all had a good laugh. But good, as my wife said, good on her for asking.
Wow, asking the straight edge dad about drinking. That's
Yeah,
pretty bold, I'd have to
yeah,
say.
yep, yep, exactly.
So basically, you just do the regular family thing too with the tree and all that. Do you do all that stuff?
All that sort of stuff, right? We're not big on having like 6 million lights and that sort of stuff. It's very, we're yeah, I'm an old Yankee, so it's all, so it's like, yeah, some greenery and and a tree and ornaments and stuff. But and then on Christmas Day we went down to some of my parents who live down in Fairhaven next to New Bedford on the south coast of Massachusetts.
Fairhaven.
The land of Moby Dick, for those of you tuning in from afar, and then went down to over to my nephew's house afterwards. And my nephew has 4 children. He and his wife have four kids, four lovely little kids, and they also have 4 large dogs, including a Saint Bernard who just had 11 puppies. There was
Evan,
a lot of chaos going on at that house.
were all the puppies there?
Yeah,
Oh, wow, that must have been trippy. I'd like to just lay down in a between 11 puppies and
yeah,
just
it,
let them
it, it
crawl
was.
all over me.
Yeah, one of my nephew's sons, who is 4, did just that, and it was just totally hilarious. Totally hilarious. 3-week-old Saint Bernard puppies are pretty big, and 11 of them. It's a scene.
That sounds like fun. I'm going to hit you with a couple of different things before we talk about music. You seem to stay in a pretty good state of mind, or at least it seems that way to me and other people. What do you say to people that are having a hard time dealing with all the BS going on in the world, or maybe even just dealing with their own shit, whether it be financial, mental, whatever? What kind of advice do you give to people, right? It seems like I personally think we're almost around the same age. I think this is the craziest time of my entire life. I don't know if you feel the same, but
Yeah, I mean, some of it certainly is that we're older and we don't quite have the same energy to go out and do stuff, or also that we've gathered enough wisdom to kind of go like, all right, that does not need more Hank energy going to this thing or that thing. Um, uh, I I think it's really easy for us. Um, every, let me back up and say everyone is grieving from the pandemic still,
Yeah.
and probably still will be, and whether it's you lost a friend, you lost a job, you lost, you weren't able to go to your prom, or all the different
Hmm.
things,
Hmm.
I mean, and they go from things that you kind of go, ah, prom, um as compared to someone who lost their parents to COVID or that sort of thing. But we're all grieving, and we all grieve in different ways. And um and I think, sometimes people who aren't, who are sort of in denial, or want people to kind of like hurry up, I've done my work, hurry up, like that's not really good, and then other people, the way they're processing it, they're dragging on, they kind of wallowing in it, and that's really difficult too, to not find a way to, out and through all of this. um and also, because of the pandemic, we are way more isolated. We are already an isolated culture, but it became even more so. There are less opportunities for people to get together. I am pleased with the amount of little clubs, of smaller clubs that have opened up and gotten chance for people to be together. But um, with that isolation just comes everyone just kind of thinking in their own minds and thinking their own thoughts, and not having a chance to really sort of bounce ideas off of friends, kind of going like, hey, this is what's going on with me, or I'm worried about this. And so we're all in our own minds, and and then something goes on in the world, and we go online to sort of find out more information, and you get bombarded with stuff. My as I said, my eldest daughter's up in Montreal, and with everything that's gone on this fall, there's lots to protest. And I just, reminded her, like, to, keep her own keep her own thoughts, don't be swayed one way or the other. I said, because um there is anti-Semitism, there's Islamophobia out there in Quebec, just like it is here in the States. And I said, it's the easiest thing for me to say, which is stand up for peace. And I said, it's the easiest thing for me to say, but it's the hardest thing to do, because everyone wants to pull you in one direction or the other. These people did this, and these people did that, and it's, and just sort of say, we need peace. We need to work for peace, and that is the hardest thing, because everybody wants you to wave their flag, to show that you're not, this or that. And it's hard. It's hard not to fall into, because everyone else wants to pressure you one way or another, to say like, oh, one more person on our side, and that's not really what's always needed.
I mean, I don't want to get all political or anything, but I think that what's going on with Israel and Gaza right now, Palestinians, is like one of the most frustrating things I've experienced in my life. Because, without getting into the details of it, I only want to look at the humanitarian part of it and all these kids. All I see is kids and innocent people that are suffering. Because my mother often told me the stories about when she was in Italy and Germany was bombing Italy. Or actually, I think it was it might have even been the Allies that were bombing Germany during World War II, and how her and her mother and sister were hiding in their basement, how they barely survived the bombings. And I think about that, and I see people's faces that I know, even though they're not there, what it would be like trying to protect your little kids from this when you have nothing to do with what's going on at all. And to me, that's one of the most frustrating things that's happening in the world right now. And I wish I could personally do something, but honestly, Hank, I don't know what I can do. I don't know what any of us can do. Seems like the US has put themselves in a position where we're in this position now, and what do we do? They don't know what to do.
Yeah, my mother, had grew up in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and the Germans bombed Belfast as well, and it was it was, she too has stories about, bombs falling, and and of course also, um kids being kids, and she said like the next day she and her cousins, were out picking up sort of, shrapnel from bombs that had exploded, and and she was like, and like, and how her own mother was just like, you know shocked at, like, because they'd sent my mom and her cousins off to a place they thought would be safe, and that the Germans wouldn't bomb, but the Germans bombed it by mistake.
Yeah.
They overshot, and overshot the shipyards, and my grandmother showed up, and like the house across the street was demolished, vaporized, and there was my mom and her cousins like in the pit, like picking up shrapnel, and my grandmother supposedly just like almost passed out. It just kind of going like, what the hell's going on with our little kids, and so
I
um
guess when I started the whole thing off about the current affairs and how we look at it, to me, it goes all the way back to 2016. That's when it all started. Then we had to deal with the pandemic, and then what happened with Black Lives Matters and all these other people thinking their lives matter more. And now we have to deal with this. And it's like, I'm just trying to enjoy my life. In fact, I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to get your vibe on this. I've been telling a lot of people lately when they ask me about, they say they want to do this, they want to see do that. My new vibes lately has been like, do what makes you happy. Like for example, I decided I want to talk more about music and stuff than I could do on my show because I just love to talk about music. So this podcast I've been trying to get going for a long time, Mirror Stars. I tried to take it in a political direction for a while. I've decided to disband that whole idea, and this is the first time I'm talking about it publicly. It's going to become an offshoot of Blowing Smoke with Twisted Rico, and it's going to be all about geeking out about music and talking about records and reviewing records and things like that. And that personally will make me happy. So I tell other people, do whatever you have to do to make you happy. And here's my question to you. What if they start doing things that you don't like after you give them that advice? How do you deal with someone that you know is doing something they shouldn't be doing?
well, I guess depends on what it is, and some of it is just sort of, I can't control everybody, and I think that's a something I learned a long time ago in ministry, is that you can't control everybody. You can't control what you want, what people are going to do, what they're going to do. Um, and So I think it depends on what they're doing and how close they are to me. Um, it'd be something. It's one thing if it's my kid, rather than somebody I see, every few months. Um, but it's a uh yeah, it's difficult to see those things, and I mean, it's tough, seeing folks who, that you spent time with in your youth, all of a sudden getting involved in things that you kind of go, oh no, no, you're not voting for that guy, you know. Um, I think it is important for us to be able to have friends with different opinions.
I guess I was
So
kind of alluding to that because we
yeah,
do
yeah,
those.
but I think it's also it's important for us to hear from other folks, have friends, and also not to just kind of go like, all right, this someone didn't get a vaccine. That doesn't mean that they are full on QAnon idiots, blah 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 blah. That could just be that's their take on that, and uh so it's um uh
We
and
did, we did, we did go after those people. Well, I say we because I know I was part of that. We did go after those people pretty hard. And now I think back about it, I'm like, there's probably a lot of cool people out there that didn't get the vaccine. In fact, I know a couple, and I might have been a little too hard with my views back then. And I don't know. It's a
well
difficult time.
and I think some of it also is being able to uh you know kind of like uh um get past that yourself, forgive them, and ask for forgiveness, too, and kind of going like, and whether that is like actually having to say that you're sorry, or or whatever, but or if it's just sort of like re-engaging with them on a different thing, re-engaging with them. Um, because for the most part, most of the people that we've known since the day, are still the same people, and they've gotten a few, we've all gone in different routes, when I tell people that, that, you know, like I'm a minister, they kind of go, oh, what happened to him? How'd that happen? And and then they hang out and or chat with me, and they kind of go, oh, it's still Hank. All right, um, his church is wacky. Okay, I get it.
I never feel that way around you. It's really weird. I never feel that way. And I know you know that I'm not into organized religion at all. And you don't seem to hold that against me at all. You just,
Well, if I did, it'd be a really small group of people I'd be hanging out with, and part of it is too is that I want to hang out with the people, you know, uh, whom I'm, like who I'm friends with. It's funny. I mean, I've really loved so many of the people that I've gotten to work with as and by being people's ministers. Um, but more often than not, I've been, the place where I really feel called to be is to be with like our old rock and roll friends, and whether that's like working with somebody, and being with folks, whether we're doing protests or helping them, because someone in their life has died, and they don't know what to do, and I've got some experience in with funerals and and everything and all that sort of stuff, and just helping people, in those vulnerable moments, because it's really easy. um I always say that we talk about the military industrial complex, and but there's also sort of like the funeral industrial complex, that when someone dies, like the funeral home will swoop in, because so many of us have just not dealt with with funeral homes the way that previous generations had. My
it's
parents' generation,
changing. Yeah, things are changing.
my dad has, like, however many years ago, went down to the local funeral home and went, oh, okay, let me get a casket, and this, I want to have this type of service, I want to do this, and it's all paid for. And that's not something that we've done, and some of it is sort of the baby boomers were, I think, having their own issues about life and death, and have sort of denied it, and that it doesn't really happen, and and thus don't really, you know, deal with the people who deal with death. And so, why are we talking about
Well,
death on
no,
this
I'm
rock and
gonna
roll
s-
podcast?
I'm segueing into me. I was gonna. I thought when you said, I'm used to helping so many people. I thought you were gonna say I'm used to helping so many bands unload their gear from their van. But
Well, I
you,
mean, I think in some ways, I think that's true too. That, like, you know, um, yeah, working with people, working with it, being part of the gang, being part of the scene. I think that's always, I'm somebody who's always loved community, always loved, being with people, having fun, and I think that's always my strong point, and that's always what I've wanted to do in ministry is bring people together,
yeah.
and
Do you? I'm gonna change the subject now because there's certain issues I can talk to you about, Hank, that I can't talk to other people about. So I can't really.
this is a podcast. Other people will be listening to this. I just want to remind you that other people will be listening to this podcast. But you go ahead. I
I
have this
don't think
alone.
there's anything wrong with what we're talking about. Do you remember the first band that you actually listened to? Because I know you're like me and you've been a lifelong music fan. I mean, do you remember how old you were and what you heard for the first time?
So my mother was a traditional Irish storyteller. Like, as I said, my mom is from Northern Ireland, and my mom had gotten involved in the traditional folk music scene in Scotland in the late 50s and early 60s. And and then met my dad, and moved over here to the States, and was involved in the folk music scene here. But once again, the traditional folk music scene, not the Bob Dylan singer songwriter folk music scene, but the real sort of, like, the sort of the roots, whether it's Irish roots or British roots or Ukrainian roots or American roots music. Um, that's the stuff I grew up with, and so,
Yeah.
like, I just grew up going to concerts, and you know, so it's hard to sort of say like, what's the first band you saw? Because like I was always seeing we were always seeing music in our family and going to festivals and traveling around. Um, like I first got into I first got into punk rock in part because there were a
What
bunch of
was punk? Did you have a classic rock phase, or did you just go straight to punk?
pretty much went straight to punk. I mean, it
Straight
was
to
around, right? So
punk.
you always, you know, I remember hanging out with somebody, uh, um, uh, I think my sister was dating some guy who was like really into the Doors. I'm kind of, going over to his apartment and just being like, oh, okay, all right, um, and uh, but yes, but really, no, I really went from like sort of traditional folk music, and then there are these guys who were from like the southeastern Mass, Rhode Island area, and a bunch of them they were older than I was, and so in like the late 70s or I guess late 70s, they all went over to Ireland for a summer to like learn from the masters, learn go and play in pubs and stuff. And when they came back, they had been introduced to punk rock, and and I was not a musician. I'm not still not a musician, but I was like, how can I like I want to show these guys that I'm cool. Oh, I'll get into punk rock. So I got into punk rock sort of through a very weird back, sort of thing. And that said, I also had my best friend's family who lived around the corner. Their oldest brother, Mike, had gone off and lived in New York City and was hanging around CBGBs. And I remember him sort of, coming back and telling us stories of like seeing Devo and Patti Smith. And I remember him telling us, like, oh yeah, Devo came out, they're all wearing garbage bags. And we were like, wow, we're like 12 years old, garbage bags. And then he was like, yeah. And then Patti Smith, and she's throwing tampons. And of course, we're 12-year-old boys. We're like, we don't know what that is. Wow. And but so it was just this kind of like this other music, that you just kind of you heard more about punk than you actually heard punk music. But I remember hearing the Ramones. I remember hearing I Want to Be Sedated. That was like I think the first punk rock song I
Was
ever
this
heard.
on the radio, or how were you
It must have been
listening?
on the radio some places that UMass Dartmouth, which was at and I'm so old it was SMU, it was Southeastern Massachusetts University, and they had a radio show, and somehow like our radio was set to that, and I heard that, and it was like so many people, you hear that and you kind of go, oh, this is a lot different than like all the kids at school that I wasn't really crazy about, that they're listening to all the Journey and Nazareth and all this other stuff, that all of a sudden for me to go like, oh, what's that? Wow, this is great, and
So you didn't like any of those bands?
no, 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 no. Yeah. So I know I've had to sort of go back, and like everybody else, the Beatles were in the air, but like I've often felt, I've often described it like, um, uh, my feelings about the Beatles are probably the same feelings that people who are Jewish feel about Christmas carols. Like you can't avoid them, you hear them all over the place, but it's not really for me,
Wow.
and but of course you heard the Beatles. I remember actually going down to the local library in Fairhaven and going like, what rock records do they have? And the only Beatles record that they had was the Beatles singing in German. And to be honest, I don't think it was actually the Beatles. I think it was just like somebody you know had recorded a bunch of Beatles songs in German, but said it was the Beatles, and so like I still have like, come, what is it like, come Dinah something, your hand, like I want to hold your hand, but in German, like it's
Yeah,
still like,
yeah.
still rattling
Uh,
around in my brain someplace. Um, yeah, so I got into punk rock and like, and also the sort of the absurdist stuff. There was the local pharmacy up the street.
where
Someone
was
must have.
this? What town was this?
Oh, in Fairhaven. So down
Fairhaven,
New Bedford,
Massachusetts.
Fairhaven, and then
Yes.
you get to Mattapoisett and the next little towns down there. And there was the local pharmacy. Somebody probably made a mistake and ordered it was a magazine out of LA called Take It magazine, and it was sort of like it was a sort of a new wave punk rock magazine. And I remember all of a sudden discovering it. I didn't have any money to buy it, and so but they had a flexi disc in there. Like,
Ooh.
have we talked about flexi? I don't know if I can't remember you talking about flexi discs at all. but like
I remember flexi
what a
discs.
crazy technology that was, right? You know,
Yeah.
for anybody who doesn't know, it was this piece of flexible plastic that would be
Play
yeah,
it.
it would be in a magazine,
Yeah.
and you tear it out, and then you put it on your turntable, but you'd have to put like a quarter on there or a dime to hold it down, because if you didn't and you put the needle on it, it would just like it wouldn't play, it would just stuck. But anyway, so I stole it and like snuck it home, and uh
What?
um and,
Wow. You
and
stole it?
I know, yeah, a flexi disc.
You're the last person I expect to say stole
It wasn't
something.
a car. It wasn't a car. Um,
It's okay. I don't
St.
care. I've
Peter,
stole a
St.
few
Peter,
things
let me into
myself.
heaven. There's a flexi disc you stole at the pharmacy in East Fairhaven. Um, and but it had three bands. It had Black Flag doing Rise Above. It had the Dead Kennedys, um, uh, Kill the Poor, and then it had the Angry Samoans doing I think Lights Out, and then this other little rambling stuff from the like some funny little outtakes from the Angry Samoans, and I was just like, this stuff is crazy, but the Angry Samoan stuff I loved because it was absurdist,
Yeah.
poke your eye with
And
a
the
fork,
pic
and like
and
that's
the
like how
flexi
excellent is that?
disc. Yeah, and
Yeah.
the flexi disc is now worth $350, but I can't
I
find it.
you can only imagine what that actually would be worth. Um, Probably when my parents pass away and I'll be like, going through stuff, I'll find it,
I love
Um,
when I have these bands on the show now. John Anastas is on not too long ago. Yeah, Brotherhood's. You could still get the original for $385 on Discogs. Why do I want to get a reissue? I could just go buy the original for $385.
it was, yeah, and like I don't know about you, Steve, but like my original copy of Brotherhood was stolen, from some apartment in Alston, decades ago. So maybe that's the one that's being sold
Yeah,
a
I
couple
wish
of
I
decades
had
ago.
I don't have any of those original copies of any of those Exclaim records,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
I get rid of all my stuff. It's just
I'm
you know
gonna I'm gonna ask you about those in a second. What I want to refresh my memory. Slapshot, COC, FU/Straw Dogs. Were there other
uniform
bands that
choice
you got in the van with?
and uniform choice.
Uniform. How could I forget Pat Dubar? Damn. Pat Dubar has done a really good job of disappearing off the face of the earth.
Pat is he's living down in he's still living in Orange County. He's like a football coach.
He
Um,
is. Did Joe
yep,
Nelson tell you this?
yeah, 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 yeah,
Wow. Yeah. Joe told me he still was in touch with the Dubars, but
yeah.
uh, Pat's not on social media, as far as I know,
No,
anywhere.
no.
He's one of the coolest guys, by the way. I have a list of people I was going to ask you about, but let's talk about Pat for a minute. I'll never forget meeting Pat Dubar. He was just the West Coast straight edge guy in my mind,
Yeah,
screaming at change, and when I met Pat, he was the nicest guy. And we ended up having a relationship. And then when he was in Mindfunk that got signed to Epic, we hung around more. And he was in we were both in LA at that time. And I really got to know him. And he's a really one of the nicest guys I could say I've ever met in the music business.
yeah. A real sweet guy, you know, empathetic, and fun to be around. I did a tour with them. It was myself and Roger Marbury who played bass in
Wait,
Dag Nasty, and
yeah.
and the two of us were the roadies, and it was sort of a desperate like tour. It wasn't like a tour of
What
of
era
like
was this? This is before Giant. This is like the early.
no, this is like staring at the sun. So I think that was
Really?
Giant. Yeah, yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Were you with them in New York when they played CBGB's?
Yes, yes.
See, I didn't know that. I didn't know you then, but I was at that
No,
show. I
we we
remember.
we we did know each other then, but we probably didn't know each other. I was also I'd also just I
Well,
was
we
coming
did
down.
know each other then.
Yeah,
Sorry, we did
yeah.
because
No,
we
it's all right.
met.
We had I had
We
I
met
maybe just met up with him in Boston. I did half that tour. Roger did the whole tour. I did half that tour, so I ended up in LA. Um,
because we met in 85, 86, and that
85.
record
Yep,
came out in 88.
yep.
Or yeah, so it was a few. Yeah, of course we knew each other, but I didn't remember you being on tour with them. That's
Well, so,
great.
like, hey, we'll run into each other at CBGB's at this crazy punk rock show in August or July of whatever year that was. So yeah, that was.
those hardcore matinees at CB's were the best, the absolute best. I had so much fun at the long wait because I love the early shows. I love the early show. So was there anyone so Uniform Choice, FU slash Straw Dogs, COC and Slapshot, those were pretty much the bands you worked
Yeah,
with?
yeah, yeah. And like, now everything is specialized. I mean, certainly bands are bigger now, so, but they would have like a guitar tech and a drum tech. I was just like, I was working with these bands when they were just, everyone was small. So like you would do everything. You'd sell t-shirts, and then when the band went on, you'd have to like take the t-shirts down, run backstage, and then be there to keep people off the stage, or like, maybe try to restring a guitar. Like luckily other people were better. My brain does not work in the let's tune this thing up, but I could at least get the right string on the guitar and let the guitarist tune it up when when needed. And then get back, sell more t-shirts, and then get in the van and drive off to the next show.
Did you
Um,
do much of the driving?
oh yeah, I love driving. So
Yeah,
yeah,
me too. I
yeah,
used to
yeah.
love when I went on the road and drove. Do you remember when you told some of these bands that you were going to be, or were you already on your way to becoming a minister, and their reactions? Do you remember when that happened?
No, but I mean, because I think when people hear that I was a minister, they kind of go, oh, and everyone sort of expects me to have had some moment where like I was living a life of sin, and then all of a sudden I've seen the light, and that's not
You stole a flexi disc. Come on, man.
I ripped it out of the magazine, stuffed it in my jacket. Um, and uh, but and so I was always involved in my church youth group, and
And
part of that too was that, like, growing up and being a kid in born in the mid '60s, um, and not really listening to rock and roll, but really listening to um, uh, um,
punk.
traditional folk music stuff, and then getting into punk, like, not a popular opinion, amongst other kids. So it was not an easy go of it, you
Were
know.
there any of your friends, you don't even have to mention any names if you don't want, that were not understanding about the direction that you're going in, or were all your closest friends, like this? I imagine the slap shot guys and the FU guys, those were probably your closest friends at that
Yeah,
time.
yeah. And I think everyone just kind of goes, oh, all right, and so, like, and also as a Unitarian Universalist minister, it's more liberal than most, um uh uh you know than most people that I know anyway. So like people just go, oh, you're there, you're not, um uh you're not super conservative, you do this, oh, all right, and he sort of explained what it is that sort of the range of beliefs in
It's
Unitarian
not like
Universalism.
being a Catholic priest or anything like that.
Right, or like a Southern Baptist minister, or somebody handling snakes, or all of a sudden being embracing, sort of being believing that Jesus and America are synonymous, and that sort of thing. So um so there was a lot of yeah, so for the most part I think people just kind of went, oh, all right, and then I like, I haven't changed that much. I mean, I can, write a sentence better than I could certainly 30 years ago, but uh,
A
you know,
lot of people, a lot of people probably also found out the way I did when they put on American Hardcore, and there was that massive introduction of you, and I was like, I know that guy.
it's funny. I was at the Sam Black Church in Worcester at the end of October this year, their big 35th reunion
Yeah,
show,
yeah.
and I'm in the pit waiting for the band to go on, and I'm standing there, and this guy who I didn't notice turns to me and he goes, "Hey, you're the minister guy from American Hardcore." And I was like, "Holy smokes!" That like, I was like, that movie came out, you know 25 years ago, and I was like, Yes, I am. Or 20 years ago, yeah, that's me. And I was like, wow, my skin regime must really be working if people can still recognize me from all those years ago.
Oh, I
Um,
remember when I told people I know you when I watched the film, they're like, "What? You know him?" I'm like, "Yeah, I do know him. He slept on my floor once, actually, in California." But
I was trying to get the Steve Blush, who put the movie together. I said, like, oh, it'd be great if we could get, in the start of the decline of Western civilization. There's that scene of each member, each, like, the singer of each band reading a little disclaimer, like, by being here, you agree that you will appear on film, and you will not just. And I thought, like, oh, if we could only get that verbiage and have me reading it from the pulpit, would just be hilarious. We just couldn't find it in time enough, but like, oh, that would have been the best. So
Uh, I was gonna flip the conversation a little bit here. I know you're a big supporter of the long wait, and I saw you the most recent time out the Middle East. I've talked about this show like I think in every show I've done since because Verbal Assault was there. I mean, it was a
they were
great day.
tremendous, tremendous. Verbal Assault have just gotten better, and
Yeah, I was really surprised because I thought, wow, it's going to be really hard for them to follow the long way because the long wait, even though Steve Verstein was telling me I couldn't hear myself, I didn't think we sounded good. I was like, what are you on, dude? You guys were amazing. I thought they were incredible that day. And
yeah.
then Verbal Assault came out and they held their own.
Oh my gosh, I mean, great musicians. Um, um, Pete is just a phenomenal
Love the
guitar
guy.
player, phenomenal guitar player, and oh my gosh, I can't remember the drummer and bass players' names. Have escaped me right now. But I think those guys have played together in reggae bands down in the Newport area
Yeah,
forever, so they're just really tight. And Chris Jones is like has gone from being like the guy doing skateboard type jumps, off of drums and stuff, to really intense,
he is
like,
very intense.
it was they're just great, really, really great. Yeah. And of course, the long wait guys are just, like, so many of them were my pals, and I also have to, I feel like I have some ownership of that band as well, because it grew out of um the Slapknot event that we did
Right.
a couple of years ago, recognizing Slapshot's 35 years, where I organized all, as many of the former members of Slapshot together, to put on a sort of a Slapshot karaoke with all these different, versions of the band, and it sort of grew out of that. So um,
I'm
yeah,
looking up some things while I'm talking to you because when I worked with Verbal Assault on trial, it was the Gorman brothers.
yeah, 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 right, right,
Okay, was it Dylan?
yes,
Dylan and Doug, right?
yep.
Yeah, those I was talking to the bass player. Which one was he? I'm sorry, I don't know this. But I was talking to the bass player and he was really cool. He was a really nice guy. And yeah, that day was really special. Was there things that happened in the last couple of years or even the last year, shows or anything? You mentioned Sam Black Church.
That
We're
was
at
great.
that show. Were there other shows that you went to that really just popped out at you and were like,
Yes,
wow?
Emil and the Sniffers. I have been wanting to see them forever. Saw them; they were great. They were great. Um, uh, Went off, and Mark McKay and Mark, who's the drummer for Slapshot
Yeah.
and the Long Wait, um, uh, have been pals from, like, sort of day one of getting into punk rock. Um, and um, uh, and so he and I went to go see Steve Ignorant from Crass play at Sonia's
Oh,
at the Middle East. And so we were looking forward to that. This is great. There were two opening bands. The first one was this, like, um, uh, anarchist band from New York, whose name isn't with me right now, but who were great, and were very, like, straightforward, and uh, at one point the singer, like, said something, and somebody in the audience yells, like, punch a Nazi, and he went, oh, hang on, stops the band, goes, wait a minute, you're right, nothing feels better than punching a Nazi, but what the left really needs are places to organize, places to come together. And I was like, oh, this is great. The next band that came on is called
we're Nazis. No, I'm just
yeah,
kidding.
yeah, no, it's called it's called Hymns, HIMS, the Hymns experience, or oh no no anyway,
HYMS?
HIMS, hymns. um and the Hymns Collective, they're out of Philadelphia. And anyway, so I'm so like the first band goes off and the other band is setting up, and I'm talking to Mark and a bunch of other people, Al Quint, and we're chatting, and then someone goes, what's going on, on stage? And I turn around, and there's just a pile of amps. I mean, literally, it looked like something like you'd made a pillow fort when you were a kid. Just this wall of amplifiers, but some tipped sideways. And there's a singer who has a laptop, and then there is a guitar player. And I'm like, what's going on? Singer hits the keyboard, bass and drums come on, guitar player starts playing, the singer starts screaming, and I was like, and the singer's also like, she is, she looks, have you ever seen images of the actor Divine, when
Uh-huh.
she wasn't dressed as Divine? This is what the singer for Hymns looks like. You know,
Wow.
kind of chubby, but wearing some, cookie cutter shorts,
Yeah.
looking fabulous, looking great, singing, and in between like songs. So it was, kind of like whatever, like thrash core. There's so many terms, but kind of like, like sounds like Hoover with had just sucked up a bunch of marbles, kind of voice. And then in between, the guitar player would stop, and all of a sudden it would be like Delight would be playing in between. Be like, groove is in the heart, and
Wow.
they both start dancing around, and then all of a sudden like jump back into groove is in the heart, but like screaming it. It was fantastic.
Really?
I had the same like visceral reaction as I did when I first saw Guar. Like, I got to see more of this.
Oh, I got to check this
They're
out.
tapping into something completely different. Um, it was fantastic, and so it's a collective. The singer is always with the band. Sometimes they have drums, sometimes they have a bass player, sometimes they have a couple guitar players. Um, but there's always the singer and a guitar player. And
Where was this show, Hank?
oh, this was at Sonia's in the at the Middle
Sonia,
East.
yeah.
The Hymns Collective, and it's a gay anarchist collective out of Philadelphia.
Oh, I got to
And
check this out. It's really
spectacular,
funny. You're always thanking me for introducing you to new bands. Thank you. You just introduced me to a
so
band
great.
I
And
never heard.
then Steve Ignorant came on and sang, sang craft songs, and he's got a great band. Oh, I can't think of the woman's name who's the other singer right now, but it was great. It really was great. It was, I was able to chat with Steve Ignorant beforehand, which is also just one of those things. I think for me growing up, like Straight Edge and Crass were like these two really great, you know, ideas that
How
like,
does it feel to be the mother of 1,000 dead?
right, but like, here is this, here's a philosophy of anarchism and peace, and and then also having Straight Edge, kind of, which is
Mm.
also, then we're not going to do drugs, we're gonna, like, let's
Crass doesn't
simplify
get enough
this,
credit.
the sounds of the our larger cultures around us, and remember our own values, and those two things really
Yeah.
and still guide me in many ways. So um
Interesting.
being able to
Crass
have that.
Crass doesn't get enough credit for how they would just everyone was scared of them. They were just scared. But I remember there was this guy, Alan Stern. You might know him. He was
Hmm.
hanging out in the hardcore scene. He's one of the guys on stage during the Negative FX Bradford Hotel. You
Oh
could
yeah,
see him
yeah.
up there. He's wearing a flannel shirt. He loved Crass. And he was like a nerdy dude that you would never expect to be in a pit. Like back then, you didn't know who was going to be in the pit and who wasn't. And he turned me on to Crass when we were at WDJM in Framingham. And I was like, wow, because they're so political and
Yeah.
so like in your face. I absolutely love that band. I wanted to ask you, when you saw Emil and the Sniffers, did you see Die Spitz?
Oh yeah, I did.
You didn't like
Not that
them?
not that impressed. No.
Okay, I was curious. All women, right?
Yeah,
From
and that was great.
Texas.
But it was also just sort of like, it was so sort of thrown together that I just wasn't impressed. Their songs were okay, but nothing really that really, stood out. And uh the
They have a very casual approach because I've watched many of their. They don't. It's like it's not organized at times.
Yeah, and like somebody broke a guitar string, and they're like, "Oh, we don't have any guitars. We don't. Our other guitar, wait, my other guitar's out in the van," and leaves the stage, runs off.
What?
And I was just like,
Well,
I
that's a
I
big
kept going like,
no-no.
"Where's your roadie? Where's your as a former roadie, like, where's your roadie?" So
Well, if they're on that tour, they must have been making a few bucks. I
I'm
mean,
yes, exactly, yeah. Um,
um, so anything else that you saw in the last year? I mean, you were at the first long wait show that
yes,
happened out in
right,
Notch Brewery. To me, that was the show of the year. That and the Justine Covalt tribute show. Those two shows right there were like to me my two
yeah,
favorite of the
right. And
year.
unfortunately, I couldn't get to the Justine show. Um, but yeah, and just but knowing all these great folks who were there, and I mean, I think it's um, we are certainly a generation of folks, not just a generation, but it being in this scene too. We've lost friends, all along the way, from almost from the get go. You knew kids who were, you know, whether it's drug overdoses or drunk driving or suicide or
Yeah.
some other event. Never mind sort of childhood cancers and that, those sort of things. But we certainly had lots of friends who passed away, and now it's we're losing friends to more grown up causes, and it's certainly not easy, at any point to lose those folks. Though we have we've lost a bunch, and in some ways, it's not that it's you should get used to it, but it's certainly um like
It's
it's
it'll never be
heartbreaking. But
easy.
you've yeah, but we've learned a bit, I think.
Yeah, I've lost a lot of friends in the last few years, and it's horrible. I wanted to ask you about your
How
fam.
you and I have matching eyeglasses. Oh, sorry, no.
Did you get yours at Spectacle
Of
Eyewear?
course, of course, yeah.
Oh,
We have the same.
Paul, this
Look at
is
that
for you,
same glass.
Paul. Paul's getting a free spot here. Thank you, Paul, for the specs. Um, yeah, I like yours better than mine, actually. I'm gonna have to like talk to Paul about that.
It's my hairline.
I'm not showing you my hairline. Nice try, though. Um, what do you think about I know you, I mean, I think I know what you'll probably say. You're probably gonna say, yeah. But the fact that SSD and DYS both reissued their 40-year-old albums all right in the same time period. I mean, with the buzz and everything, do you prefer one or the other, or is it both exciting for you that they both were reissued?
Oh, I think uh I think it's great. But I also, I'm always like, once again, I just remember like my neighbors who were like, who seemed very cool. They had a daughter who was my age, and their parents were these cool hippies. But I remember the dad sort of saying to me once, like, all the best music's already been played. All the best all the best parties have already happened. Which is like totally like a real, fuck you to fuck you, kid. Nothing you can do can match this. And so, like,
Lester Bangs was saying that in 1973, by the way. He thought
right,
rock and roll was over.
right, right.
Then the
And
Stooges came along and changed his mind in a hurry.
yeah, but right, but I think it's so I'd never want to be able to sort of say like that was the best stuff. Yeah, those were great times and great music, and certainly that the Brotherhood album, I think, for me, meant more than the kids will have their say. Um,
Really?
yeah, but Get It Away, the next
Second.
SSD album, the top of the pops for me. That really is just one of my top favorite albums. Um, and
Well,
but
Glue from Get It Away and Wolfpack, which has ended up now on the Brotherhood album, they're to me define the whole Boston crew and that whole generation. Those two songs, they were just all about, got to stick together. From Smalley
well,
telling us how proud he is to be part of the whole thing. I
Well,
mean,
and I think, the Last Rites single that came out, which was Choke's second band after Negative
yeah,
X
yeah,
before Slapshot. Um, and and that had two songs on it that had Chunks, which has been covered by
chunks.
everybody. Dinosaur Jr. does a fantastic version of that. And then So Ends Our Night. And for me, So Ends Our Night is the best Boston hardcore song ever. In part it's he's like, name checking like Kenmore Square, and he's talking about like drinking Coca-Cola, and not booze. And so for me, So Ends Our Night is like the best Boston hardcore song ever. But that's just me.
I was going to try and do this word association thing with you, unless I have a bunch of names here, and I was going to say the name and tell me what popped in your head. Would you be into that, or do you want to talk
Yeah, sure. Well,
like
sure. I don't know.
when
Right?
I
I hope.
like I'm just going to say a band name or a person, and you tell me what comes to mind. SSD.
uh Jamie, who is, who who's been on the show a bunch of times. And what's and Jamie is he's
Three
just great.
times. Wow,
And
he's
right,
been on.
and a very cool. Jamie's also just a super cool guy. And and it's always funny because when I listen to the podcasts, and interviews that he's on, Al's talking more, or Chris is talking more, which I just find hilarious because Jamie's just himself is just he talks all the time, so it's just so funny. But yeah, and so SSD is great, and we're sort of this mythic band. When I showed up in Boston, you know, from the South Shore, that you're like, oh right, this band, blah, 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 and they'd already sort of hit their peak by the time I start hanging around too. So
Were they already metal by then?
or at least they're certainly on their way. I took my last year of high school in Poughkeepsie at a Quaker high school, because my own high school was just horrible and I was having horrible experiences there. So got out, went to Poughkeepsie, which was great and got me seeing shows in New York in '83 and '84. So at that time when I would have been seeing shows in Boston, a lot more shows in Boston, I was in New York. But anyway, so there you go. That's my SSD.
DYS.
DYS, Smalley and John, and actually, and actually, all those guys, Ross and Andy, just hit it off with all those guys. Dave Collins, and just sweethearts. And I mean, Jonathan. I mean, the thing I love about Jonathan. Jonathan was always the guy who was like, "I'm so punk, I'm not punk anymore." Like by not being punk and hanging out with you guys, I'm punker than you, which is just hilarious.
Oh, I
And
just had him on for a second time. He's definitely one of my favorite
oh
guests.
yeah, oh
He's
no,
so
like yeah, I listened to that whole podcast, but and we were out in LA this summer, and we went out to lunch with Jonathan. He came out to have lunch with my family, and it was great. And he's got all his insights on Hollywood stuff and the strike. It was great. It was totally
he articulates everything so well.
yeah.
I just
Oh yeah,
love the way he
yeah.
talks, man.
Unlike me, I did not send you my talking points.
You did. Yeah, I'm not just saying this, Jonathan, because you're sending me a test pressing of the Brotherhood record, by the way, which he announced on the show. And I was
I
like,
know, I heard, yeah.
what? What about Smalley, Dave Smalley?
Like great guy, earnest, and yeah, and I've known Dave, I've known his partners, I've known it was exciting. DYS breaks up, Dave leaves, and all of a sudden, he's back with Dag Nasty, and I was like, well, this is great, and then later on with All, and just all his different things. And I was like, wow, Dave has become sort of this punk rock singer to go.
Did you see Dave with both Dag Nasty and All? Because I
Oh
didn't
yeah,
see him with either band.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Wow, so he was only in Dag Nasty for a really short period of time. So, I mean, as far as touring and stuff goes, because after the first record came out, Peter went on tour
That's
with
right.
them.
Yeah,
So you
that's
saw
right.
them before the first record came out?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And yeah, one of Slapshot's first gigs was with opening for Dag Nasty. It's supposed to be Dag Nasty, Slapshot, Dag Nasty, and then Ian Mackay had a band. It was a Ghost
Embrace?
Minor. What's that?
Embrace?
Maybe it was Embrace. Yeah, that sounds right. But they broke up like literally like the night before, and so it just Dag Nasty showed up to the show, and we're like, okay, great.
Was that
Um,
TT the Bears?
no, that was at the Rat.
you saw Dag Nasty with Smalley at the Rat.
Yeah.
I am so jealous.
Yeah.
Oh,
Those
I mean, they had such electricity, that
it it
version of
it
the
really was. And it was
band.
also sort of a like a homecoming for Dave, and so everyone was really excited about that too. So that was, you
I've
know,
seen Down by Law a ton of times in DYS, but I never saw All either. He was in All for only, well, two records
two records,
actually.
yeah.
Uh, what about Gangrene?
Uh, you know, I remember getting Boston, not LA, and listening to that and being like, what are these? Who are these madmen from Braintree? You know, I mean, Gangrene and Jerry's Kids. And let me just say too, Jerry's Kids, my favorite band, favorite hardcore band, hands down.
Really?
Oh yeah, the speed of Gangrene, the power of SSD, and just the most like crazy lyrics, and just and a bunch of lovable guys. Yeah, Jerry's Kids,
There's
best,
definitely a
best.
quote in there. There's definitely a quote in there somewhere. That was spectacular. I can't wait to go back and listen to what you just said. That was great. See, I feel the same way when I saw Jerry's Kids at the Hardcore Reunion show.
Yeah.
Oh my God, they absolutely floored me that day. And I was just like, what?
Well,
But I
and
never got
when
to
you
see
when
it
you
with
see
Brian.
Drew Stone's film of that day, and he has a clip of Jerry's Kids playing a song from 1982, and then jumps into
Yeah.
whatever year that was. Uh, uh, and you realize like they're playing at the same speed. Like it just measures so perfectly. Everybody else I see slow down a little bit. Oh my god, I went last year. I went to see my wife and I went to go see the English Beat, and it was slowed down. Like he had a fine band, and Dave Wakeling's great, but it was slowed down to the point where I was like, oh, this is what people will be listening on cruise ships. This is
Yeah, Bob Sensi and Rick Jones, both of those guys, the way they play, they're so fast, man.
so fast
You,
and just great and committed and
and when Chris was with them, forget it, man. It was
yeah,
off the hook,
yeah.
man. FUs.
The best songwriting in Boston. Still, songs that you can listen to now and go, yep, like well written really well written songs, yeah, that are singable, stick in your head, and that like you listen to and you kind of go, oh yeah, this is not like somebody, well, the Boston LA aside, which is just sort of like pure fast hardcore stuff, um, but all the other stuff just
Yeah,
great.
young fast Iranians would be in my top 10 Boston songs
Yeah,
ever.
yeah.
Phenomenal. And I don't care what version you play me. Joni was trying to tell me, you gotta listen to the FU's version, not the Straw Dogs version. I'm like, I don't give
Less
a shit.
cowbell.
I don't care what version. The Freeze. I never asked you about the Freeze.
Oh, I mean, once again, like excellent guys, and who I think they uh great songs, and in some ways I think they were punished for being not even necessarily from being from down Cape, but punished because they were seen as um like sort of bigger than the scene, like, and which isn't even their part. Like they never they didn't act that way, but I think people just kind of went like, oh, people would go see the Freeze who would go see the Dead Kennedys, and not that the Dead Kennedys were bad or horrible or anything, but that it was, the scene was so insular, and it was sort of like, this is our little secret, and we don't want other people to know that like we're doing this really cool thing. So when the Dead Kennedys come out, and and like all of a sudden these jocks from your high school, show up, and you're like, what the hell are you guys doing here? Like, this is my cool thing. What the hell are you doing here? That a lot of that same crowd, not necessarily
Mm.
jocks, but like people who were just sort of peripheral to the scene, would come to the free shows, and I think people are like, oh, that's not cool. It's so I think that was one of the things about the Freeze, but like great songs, great,
Yeah,
always.
I didn't realize what they went through with the Boston Crew until they were on my show and told me that stuff. I was like, whoa. Just a couple more. Slapshot.
Oh, Slappy, the guys. It was, um so much of my so much of my life was spent in a van with those guys, um which was, and the great thing about being on tour with them is that we were all friends, and we would like, and it was always, it was, you know, like, yes, we're on tour, yes, we have to get to the show, but it was also like, we're gonna have fun. Let's go see, like, you know, I remember being on the first European tour with Slapshot, which was in a van. And we said to the road manager, who was German, we sort of said like, hey, tomorrow morning we'd like to get up early, and because we're going into Vienna, and we want to be able to go and get a tour of Mad Ludwig's castle. And he was like, what? Like, we're like, yeah, we want to do, do a little sightseeing. He's like, you guys just want to, we're like, yeah, we don't know when we're going to be in Europe again. This is, here's our chance to see these places and do these things. And yeah, we'll go to punk rock show. He was like, oh, this is so great. I tour with, often a lot of New York bands, and all they do is they just want to party and then sleep late, and I've got to wake them up. And we were like, no, we got to go. We want to see this stuff and do that. And that was Slapshot. We wanted to go and do this stuff, and yeah, go to museums, and see the giant ball of string, and and like, it was just a bunch of like jerks, on the road, which was also just hilarious too. I was explaining to my daughter the other day, we were driving to Montreal, and I said like, oh yeah, it used to be that you'd have to stop and throw change into a little basket here at this toll booth. And then I said, yeah, we used to Slapshot. We would do that. We'd throw the change in for our thing, and the gate would open, and then we throw like donuts and trash into the basket, and then drive off. And the next person had to like reach, get the stuff out, and so that is like the least vile thing that we did.
Wow.
But and she was just like, what? And it's like, that's just, it was, Slapshot was just the most fun, best guys. I'd go on a tour with those guys like in a second again. The same 5 or 6 guys.
Oh, I totally forgot about those baskets you throw money into.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
What
There's
a
somebody going like, that was you jackass. Yeah,
Hey, Hank, it's always a pleasure, man.
this was great, Steve. It's excellent. I love this podcast. It's, I said this before, the podcast helped get me through the pandemic. It always seemed like, like, you know at the worst parts of the pandemic, it was something I could look forward to, going like, okay,
Thank
Monday
you.
morning, this is coming out, this is great. And it would, get me through, and be like, okay, great. I'm hearing the voice of a friend, and often other people that I know. And that was great. And
And
it's,
you've made a lot of suggestions about who I should get. You've been very helpful, man, to me, and I really appreciate that. You're one of the biggest supporters of this. I've said this on the show before. Thank you so much.
no, thank you. And I'm going to I'm going to send you a list of some other people that I want you to maybe when you stop recording, I'll give you a name.
Executive
Other names.
producer,
Yeah.
Reverend Hank Peirce. Thank you. All
Woohoo!
right, man. Peace.
Bye.